It was the kind of rain that didn't let up. Not a gentle drizzle, but a stubborn, cold drizzle that clung to your skin and crept into your shoes, no matter how tight you pulled the laces. A little boy sat hunched on an old wooden crate, squeezed under the edge of a rusty awning that dripped water every few seconds. Beside him was a torn cardboard box with a few candy bars left inside, their wrappers spotted from the rain. He'd been there since morning. Some folks stopped, most didn't. The ones who did sometimes tossed him a coin, sometimes not even that. Every time someone passed by, the boy tried to smile, a small, shy thing that barely reached his eyes. His fingers stayed curled tight in his pockets, feeling the dampness of a few coins. He kept counting in his head. Enough for bread? For Mama? He was small for his age. His jacket was too thin. The sleeves were rolled up because they'd belonged to someone else once. Someone bigger. A gust of wind pushed the rain sideways, and he shivered. He tugged the box closer, like that would keep him warm. People always seemed to look away. It was easier, maybe. Pretend you didn't see a kid trying to sell candy in the rain. Pretend you didn't see his lips turning blue. He didn't blame them. Sometimes he wished he could look away too. But that morning he couldn't, because just a few feet down the wall, half hidden behind stacks of empty crates, there was an old man, hunched over, thin blanket thrown around his shoulders like a rag that did nothing. He was coughing, the kind of cough that sounded like it hurt to the bones. Every so often, he'd lift his head, eyes searching for something, or someone. The boy pulled his knees up tighter. He was cold too, he was hungry too, but at least he wasn't invisible, not yet. So he sat there, counting the coins in his pocket. Rain dripping down his hair, shoulders tense, wondering if maybe, just maybe, he could pretend not to see the old man. But his mama used to say, "We may have nothing, but there's always something small you can give." He didn't know if that was true. He only knew the rain kept falling. And there, in that bitter corner, he wasn't the only one waiting for a bit of warmth. The old man didn't ask for anything, not once. He just sat there, hunched under that rusty awning, knees pulled up to his chest like he was trying to hide inside himself. Rain dripped from the edge of his cap, tracing down his nose before falling to the ground. His coat was torn at the elbows, sleeves too short to cover the way his hands shook every time the wind picked up. Once in a while he'd cough. Deep, raspy, the kind that made your own chest hurt just to hear it. A couple passing by frowned, pulled their umbrellas closer, stepped wide like they might catch something. The boy watched. He shouldn't have, and he told himself that. His mother always said, "Don't stare, baby. When you stare, you see things you can't forget." But he couldn't help it. Between the small candy box on his knees and the coins in his pocket, he knew exactly what he had and what he didn't. He didn't have enough, not for himself, not for the man under the awning, and yet, every time the old man shivered, the boy's shoulders tensed, as if his own bones felt that chill too. He remembered nights when his mama would share half her bread, telling him she'd already eaten when he knew she hadn't. People think kindness is big. Sometimes it's just a boy with too few coins, glancing sideways at a stranger he's too shy to speak to. The rain fell harder, slapping against the concrete. The boy looked at the man's hands, thin, cracked skin, empty palms resting on his knees like they'd forgotten how to hold anything warm. He reached into his pocket, feeling the small, damp dollar bill folded there. It was meant to be for bread, or an apple, if he was lucky. He squeezed it tight, hoping the answer might come. But all he felt was the rain, cold, insistent, and the sound of that cough that wouldn't stop echoing in his head. Somewhere deep down he thought, if I was him, would anyone care? He didn't have the courage to move yet. But in his chest, the dollar already felt lighter, like maybe it knew it wouldn't be staying much longer. The boy sat there so long, the rain started to drip past the holes in the awning. Little drops landed on the back of his neck, slid down under his collar. He shivered, but he didn't move. In his pocket, the dollar bill felt like it was burning a hole in his skin, not because it was much, but because it was all. He looked at the box of candy bars. He thought of his mama waiting at home, the tiny loaf of bread he'd hoped to buy tonight so she wouldn't lie about being hungry again. His eyes drifted to the old man. The man hadn't looked up in a while. His shoulders shook with every cough, his breath cloudy in the cold air. One of his shoes was split open at the toe. The boy could see a big toe, purple from the chill. He hated how small he felt. Hated that all he had was one crumpled piece of paper, wet around the edges. He wished he could turn invisible, or rich enough to buy the man a hot meal, a dry coat, a soft bed. But he wasn't. He was just a boy with sticky fingers and a cheap candy box that nobody wanted today. So he did what his mama would have done. He stood up, slow, so the man wouldn't be startled. The candy box tumbled off his knees, bars scattering on the wet concrete. He didn't care. His hand trembled as he walked the few steps over. He bent down, just enough so he wouldn't tower over the old man. For a second he opened his mouth, then shut it again. Words felt silly, too big for such a small thing, so he just reached out and pressed the damp dollar into the man's cold, cracked hand. The old man flinched, eyes blinking wide like he'd forgotten how to look someone in the face. He tried to push it back. His lips moved. "No, no, boy, you keep that." But the boy just shook his head. "It's raining," the boy mumbled, voice so soft it almost got lost in the rain. "Get something warm, please." He squeezed the man's hand around the dollar, like he was tucking a blanket around a ghost. For a moment they both just stayed there, two strangers, equally soaked, equally small under that endless rain. No one else noticed, no one else cared. But maybe that was enough. One small kindness, one pair of eyes that didn't look away. The boy didn't wait for thanks. He just stood up, wiped his nose on his sleeve, and picked up what candy bars he could. His shoes splashed in the growing puddle as he walked back out into the street, the rain swallowing him whole. Behind him, the old man clutched the dollar like it weighed more than gold. Maybe to him it did. Years have a way of slipping by, like rain down a cracked window. One day melts into the next, and the world doesn't stop just because you're small or hungry or trying your best. The boy who gave away his dollar didn't turn into some hero overnight. He just grew up, the way kids like him always do. Fast, a little rough around the edges, tired before he should have been. He kept selling candy, then newspapers, then odd jobs, cleaning, fixing shoes, delivering groceries for people who never really looked him in the eye. Sometimes, when it rained, he'd stand under a shop awning and feel that damp dollar in his memory. He wondered if that old man had made it through the winter. If maybe, just maybe, that tiny bit of warmth had carried him to the next day. But life didn't have time for wondering too long. His mother's cough got worse. Medicine cost more than bread. Some nights he'd come home with his shoes so wet they squelched when he stepped, only to find her pretending she'd already eaten, saving the last crust for him. They didn't have much, but they had each other, for a while. When she was gone, it felt like someone had kicked out the walls of his tiny world. He found work where he could, mended old shoes with scraps, saved every penny, never bought anything new, never wasted a meal. People looked at him, young, thin, always busy, and thought he was doing fine, but nobody really asked, and he didn't really say. He didn't mind the rain anymore. If it came while he worked, he just let it soak him. Part of him liked how it washed the city clean, at least for an hour or two. And every so often, on nights when his bones ached and his pockets were empty, he'd remember that old man, the cracked hands, the way his eyes had gone soft, almost childlike, when a stranger did the simplest thing. It helped him keep a little piece of himself soft too. So when he could, he'd pass on a coin to a boy carrying boxes, or a woman counting change at the counter. Never much, but just enough to say, "I see you, I know you're here." He never thought much about tomorrow. Tomorrow was a luxury for people who could afford to plan ahead. For him it was always about today. Today's meal, today's shoes holding up, today's rent. If he made it through the day without owing more than he did when he woke up, that was a win. But bodies have a way of keeping count, even when you try not to. It started as a dull ache in his chest when he worked too long. He told himself it was just the cold, the late nights, the rain that never seemed to let him be. But then the ache turned into a cough, the deep scraping kind that rattled his ribs and left a metallic taste in his mouth. He ignored it. Of course he did. People like him didn't have time to get sick. But the days got harder. His hands trembled when he tied shoelaces at the little shop that barely paid him enough to keep the lights on. He'd stand behind the counter, trying not to wheeze too loud when a customer came in. He didn't want pity. He just wanted to work, to keep moving. One night, alone in his cramped room, he coughed so hard he saw stars. When he wiped his mouth, there was red on his sleeve. He sat there for a long time, staring at the faded wallpaper, the crack in the ceiling that looked like a river frozen in place. And for the first time since he was a boy, he felt small. Not in the way a child feels small, small like a flame about to flicker out. The hospital gave him numbers, bills, words he didn't understand. They told him he needed rest, treatment, money. Money. He held the estimate in his hands, paper so thin it could have been smoke. Who did he have to call? There was no family, no mother to hold his face in her hands, no father's shoulder to lean on, no one he could knock on a door for and say, "It's me, I need help." He thought about the rain, how it used to wash him clean just for a while, how it always found the cracks. And somewhere deep down he wondered, does kindness find cracks too? Or does it just slip away like everything else? He folded the bill and put it in his pocket, careful not to tear it. Outside, the street was wet again. He pulled his coat tight, stepped into the puddles, and kept walking, not sure if he was moving towards something or away. The hospital waiting room smelled like bleach and old magazines. He sat there hunched over, the same way he used to hunch under that rusty awning as a boy, knees pulled close, hands buried deep in his coat pockets. In one pocket was the crumpled bill, the one that said in big bold letters, "Payment required immediately." In the other pocket was his hand, clenched so tight it felt numb. He watched people come and go, nurses with kind eyes who still couldn't do much, families speaking in low voices, shoes squeaking on the linoleum. Nobody noticed him. Why would they? He was just another tired man on a plastic chair, hoping for a miracle that wasn't coming. Outside the window, rain tapped gently against the glass. Funny how the rain always seemed to find him, no matter where he hid. He thought about what he could sell. The shop already owed too much. His old watch, pawned years ago. His coat, it was too thin to be worth anything, but without it he'd freeze before the week was done. He felt the weight of his eyelids, the way they wanted to drop and let him disappear for a while. And that's when he felt it, a shape, a shadow that blocked out the pale hallway light. He looked up, half expecting a nurse telling him he'd have to leave if he couldn't pay. But it wasn't a nurse, it was a man, well-dressed, too well-dressed for this place. Dark coat, polished shoes, the sort of calm you can't fake. The man stood there, hands folded neatly in front of him, watching. Their eyes met. And for a split second, the boy inside him, the kid with candy bars and a crumpled dollar in his pocket, came awake again. There was something familiar in that gaze. Not the pity he was used to, not the cold indifference either. Something softer, like a question he'd forgotten how to answer. He looked away, embarrassed. He coughed once, tried to cover it, but the pain shot up his ribs like a knife. When he looked back, the man was still there, still watching. And when he took a step closer, the faintest smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. Not smug, not mocking, just warm. The man slipped his hands into his coat pockets, as if he were about to say something, but didn't. Instead, he sat down across from him, leaving only the damp floor between their shoes. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel invisible. The boy in him wondered, who notices someone like me? But somewhere, very deep down, a small voice whispered, sometimes the kindness you gave away doesn't forget the way home. For a while, they just sat there. Two men who didn't really know each other, or so it looked. One with a hospital bill burning a hole in his pocket. The other with hands folded so calm, like he'd been waiting for this moment longer than he cared to admit. Outside, the rain tapped against the window. A quiet sound, but steady. The kind of rain that makes you remember things you thought you'd forgotten. He tried not to stare. But there was something about the man's eyes. Deep set, kind, but tired around the edges, like he'd spent years trying to fix the unfixable. He cleared his throat. Can I help you? His own voice sounded small, like a child's. He hated that. The man shook his head, not in a rude way, but soft, almost like he was telling him, you've done enough. I'm the one here to help you, the man said. He wanted to laugh and or cry. He wasn't sure which would come first. Help? From who? He had no family left, no friends who'd stand up in a place like this, no one who'd call him by name unless they needed money he didn't have. You must have the wrong person, he said, voice cracking. I don't have anything. The man reached into his coat pocket, pulled out something small, pressed between two clear pieces of plastic. held it up so the flickering hallway light caught it. It was a dollar bill, old, crinkled around the edges like it had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times. His breath caught in his throat. "This," the man said, tapping the plastic gently, "is the first thing that made me believe I deserved to live another day." The words hung there, heavy like the rain on the roof. He squinted at the bill, and for a heartbeat, he was 12 years old again, knees tucked under his chin, clutching a cardboard box of candy, rain dripping down his sleeves. A hunched figure coughing in the corner. $1 that felt like the biggest thing he could give. He blinked hard. "No, that can't be." The man leaned forward. "Do you remember the gas station? The old awning that leaked more than it kept you dry?" His chest tightened. He could almost smell the wet concrete, hear the coins rattling in his pocket. "You gave me this," the man said, voice steady but warm, "when nobody else would even look at me." It was too much, too strange, too tender. He wanted to say, "It was just $1, but the words stuck in his throat. The man slipped the dollar back into his coat like it was a relic, a piece of something sacred. "That dollar fed me that night," he said. "It gave me enough to last until I found a shelter. And that shelter gave me a job cleaning floors. And the job gave me a chance to prove I was worth trusting, and here I am." He laughed, quiet, almost shy. "A stranger's kindness is why I'm still here. And now I'm going to make sure you're still here too." In that cold waiting room, with the smell of bleach and the rain drumming overhead, a boy who'd once given away everything he had finally heard the words he'd needed his whole life. "You are not alone." They moved to a quieter corner of the waiting room, away from the coughs and the buzz of vending machines. The rain outside slowed to a hush, a soft drumming on the roof that felt more like a memory than a storm. The young man, though he didn't feel young anymore, sat hunched over, staring at his hands. They were rough, cracked at the knuckles, the same hands that had once held out a damp dollar to a stranger. Now they were empty. Across from him, the man in the suit pulled out an envelope. Thick, heavy. It looked like it belonged in a world he'd never set foot in. Neat papers, big numbers that didn't feel real. "Is this charity?" he asked, the words slipping out bitter even though he didn't mean them to be. The man shook his head, patient. "Charity is when you give something to someone who can't give you anything back." He tapped the envelope lightly against his knee. "This is just a debt paid forward." He wanted to protest, wanted to say, "It was nothing, $1 isn't worth this." But his throat closed up, because deep down he knew it wasn't about the dollar. It was about a moment under a leaking awning when someone didn't look away. It was about a boy who had nothing, yet still found a way to say, "You matter." "Why me?" he whispered. It came out so small he almost didn't hear it himself. The man leaned in, elbows on his knees, eyes steady and kind. "Because you were my family that night," he said simply. "I didn't have anyone. You didn't have much, but you gave me everything." He pushed the envelope into the younger man's hands. "Your treatment's covered, your debt's cleared." Then, softer, so soft the rain almost swallowed it. "And when you're strong enough, you'll do the same for someone else. That's all I want." In that moment, the younger man felt something warm unlock in his chest. Like a door that had been jammed shut for years, finally creaked open. He pressed the envelope to his chest, fighting the sting behind his eyes. Not just for the money, but for the simple truth in those words: family isn't always who you're born with. Sometimes, family is a promise you made in the rain, and a promise that came back when you needed it most. They didn't talk much at first. Some words feel too big to push out all at once, especially when your chest's still bruised from holding them in for years. The hospital let him go home to rest before the treatment started. Well, home. He'd never called that tiny room a home, but it was all he had, except that night he didn't go back alone. The man in the suit, the man who'd once been an old stranger under a rainy awning, said simply, "Come with me, let's eat." They sat at a small diner on the corner, the kind with chipped mugs and cracked leather seats that squeaked when you shifted. It smelled like burnt toast and warm soup, good things. The young man hunched over his bowl, hands wrapped tight around the cheap ceramic like it might slip away if he let go. He kept sneaking glances across the table at the man stirring sugar into his tea like this was the most normal thing in the world. "Do you remember what you bought with that $1?" he asked finally. The man's eyes crinkled in the corners, a quiet smile, not wide but real. A loaf of bread, smallest one they had. He chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "It was stale, but it was warm, and it got me through the night. That was all I needed." They both sat in that warmth for a while, steam from the soup clouding the window. Cars splashed by outside, but neither of them really noticed the rain anymore. "You didn't have to come back," the young man said. The words slipped out before he could stop them. The man looked at him, really looked, like he could see the little boy still curled up behind tired eyes. "I did," he said, simple as that. Because sometimes, family is who you choose to remember, who you choose to stand beside when the rain comes back. For the first time in years, the young man let out a small laugh, broken, unsure, but it felt good. He wiped his nose with his sleeve, not caring that it looked childish. They ate slowly, neither rushing the meal. There was no talk of money or debt or bills waiting at the door. Just two people sharing soup and stale bread made new again by warmth. Outside, the streetlights flickered in puddles, and for once the rain felt more like a lullaby than a curse. The rain finally stopped that night. It didn't roar away in thunder or winds. It just faded, like someone turning down the volume of a song you'd almost gotten used to. They left the little diner together, stepping out under a street lamp that flickered in the puddles. The air smelled like wet asphalt and fresh hope. He didn't know what tomorrow would look like. There'd still be treatments, long nights staring at the ceiling, moments when the fear crept back in. But for the first time in forever, he knew he wouldn't be alone in that waiting room again. The man, the one who'd once held that damp dollar like it weighed 1,000 pounds, walked beside him, slow and steady, like he wasn't in a hurry to get anywhere except right there. When they reached the corner, the young man paused. He tilted his head back, letting a few stray drops of leftover drizzle hit his face. "Cold?" the man asked, half grinning. He shook his head. "No, not tonight." They stood there, watching the street sweepers push water to the gutters, the city trying to start clean again. And then, with a shy sort of pride, the man pulled something from his coat pocket. The same plastic sleeve with that old dollar, pressed flat and safe all these years. "I've kept this close," he said softly. "Every time I thought about giving up, I looked at it and remembered. Someone once believed I was worth saving." He pressed it gently into the young man's palm. "For you now. To remind you, you were never just a boy with nothing. You were someone's miracle." The young man stared down at it. The wrinkles, the faded ink, the memory still warm under his fingertips. He wanted to say thank you, but the words felt too small. So instead he looked up and said what mattered more. "I'll take care of it, and one day I'll pass it on." The man nodded. That's how it works. $1, one family, and a promise that kindness never really goes away. They turned and walked down the quiet street. Two people, different ages, different scars, but tied together by the smallest thing that ever mattered. Above them, the last drops of rain slid from the rooftops, glistening in the streetlight like tiny pieces of hope. Because sometimes that's all it takes. One small kindness, given with nothing to gain, coming back years later as a hand on your shoulder when you need it most. Maybe we never really know how far one small kindness can go. A single dollar slipped into a cracked palm under a leaking awning. A moment of warmth given by someone who had nothing left to spare. Years pass, people change. But kindness, real kindness, stays. It waits in quiet places, it weathers the storms with us. And sometimes when we least expect it, it comes home. Because family isn't always who shares your blood. Sometimes family is who stands beside you when the rain comes back and reminds you that you were never truly alone. So if you ever wonder whether your tiny kindness means anything, remember this. It just might be the only reason someone finds their way through the night. $1, one family, one promise that what you give from the heart always finds its way home. Thank you for choosing to sit here with me, for picking this story out of the thousands you could have watched instead. I hope, in some small way, it reminded you that kindness still matters, even when no one's looking. May you carry that warmth with you tonight, and if ever the rain comes back, I hope you'll remember, somewhere out there, one small good thing you do might find its way home to you too. I'll be right here, waiting to share the next story with you. Until then, take care of your heart. See you again, soon.